With all the deadlines, requirements, and work piling up, I can't help but feel exhausted, frustrated, and anxious all at the same time. Sometimes I don't even know what to feel. But you feel me? Are you burning out as well? My name is Aaron. I'm an accountancy major. I'm the leader of my organization. And most of all, I'm a highly stressed out student just like you.
Am I burning out? How do I know? What are the telltale signs of burnout? In this episode, we'll be talking about 3 components, possible sources of burnout, and what to do so that we can address it even before it starts. This is JR. I'm a youth mentor, an inspirational speaker, and events organizer. Thank you for tuning in. This is Ain't a Boss.
We've had a lot of relevant topics in the past, but I think our topic for today's podcast, for this episode, is just a cut above the rest in terms of relatability, as I've experienced this myself as well. And just to drop the bomb, the Woj bomb right there for my basketball guys watching this. Our topic, our topic for today is actually going to be centered around burnout. So wow, big word. And just to start things off, JR, let me just ask you right away, why are we talking about this in the first place?
Okay, I think we chose this topic mainly to help people like you who are holding significant positions. For example, in your organization, you're the chairperson, and it's mid-year for you, at least for your term. So most people would already be feeling it mid-year, midterm. So it will be good for us to talk about it. And then for many people, it's also year end. So even for those who are not students, for sure they are like scrambling how to like finish up reports, financial statements, and whatnot. So if you're already working and you're listening to this, this is also for you. So I guess I think it's pretty apt. But I think it's just something that people don't necessarily pay attention to, even myself. So I think I learned a lot prepping also for this episode. So it's like, I could definitely apply this in my own situation.
Yeah. And so, just to add a bit, from personal experience, I see a lot of organizations putting a premium on this topic as well. And I guess that just goes to show how important it is to students, or at least for us in college, or if you're working, you too. How to combat this, or at least alleviate the effects of burnout. I think what's useful for us to do right now, in order for us to understand how burnout works, how we can actually combat it in the first place. What better thing to do than define what burnout is in the first place? I mean, we probably both felt the symptoms or the effects of burnout in one way or another. But like what you said earlier, I learned a lot while preparing for this. And there are actually concrete, definitions, concrete pillars that we can see if we already experience, check boxes, if you will, for us to know if we're experiencing burnout. So could you enlighten me on that?
I wanted to say something lang muna, that a lot of people would talk about, like, say, mental health in general. So that's a very big topic for us to like take on. So I think this one is a good way for us to just like zoom in and even like, how do we experience it? How does that affect our mental health? But before that, also, I wanted to ask you, ikaw personally, like, before we even define it, like, have you experienced burnout? How does it look like for you? I can share my own also. My own stories.
Well, I think you know the answer to that. It's a definite yes. I have experienced burnout. Like, I mean, who hasn't? But yeah, how does it work for me? How does it look like for me? Well,
how do you feel that you experience it?
Yeah, I mean, the best way I can define it is a prolonged state of being tired. You know how we were taught in science that you get 8 hours of sleep. And I think burnout for me is that even when I get that 8 hours of sleep, I still feel tired. I still feel like I haven't accomplished anything significant. And it affects me in a lot of ways, from not being motivated to go to class, or
Yep.
putting off the important or the urgent
Yep.
pieces of work that I have to. So it's again what you
Prolonged
said.
tiredness for you and no motivation.
Those
Yeah.
two things, if I can sum it
Yep.
up.
Yeah. For me, generally, I could already feel that maybe I'm burning out. Would be when, even if I love doing the things that I'm doing, but I'm beginning to not care about it anymore.
Wow.
So it's like, okay, like, yeah, I don't want that anymore. But deep in my heart, like, oh, this is actually enjoyable for me. I love doing this. Then I'm realizing, okay, maybe I'm getting burnt out.
Right.
Okay, so having those stories or examples, our personal stories, we can say that we're not very far from the scientific definition of burnout. So, according to Christina Maslach, she's an American social psychologist. She does a lot of occupational study on, like, say, burnout, occupational burnout study. She defines burnout with three components. One would be exhaustion. So, you said something about this earlier.
Yeah.
Basically, you're just like depleted, loss of energy, fatigued. It could be physically, but I would say more of mentally and emotionally. Second component would be cynicism. So this would be me. When people would start like not caring anymore, or people before they call it depersonalization.
Right.
So negative attitudes toward the things that they're doing, being irritable. They don't want to dream for the things that they're doing or their organization. So sort of like a withdrawing from their activities. And then the third one would be inefficacy. I don't know how to pronounce that, but
I think
not
you got
being
it right.
effective.
Yeah.
Not being effective. So you think that you're not enough. You're trying to do the things that you need to be doing, but they don't seem to work. So those three components, you can say like, okay, you're probably experiencing burnout.
Yeah.
And some people might experience like one or two, but at least for Dr. Maslach, that will be a component of that. You can really say that it's burnout. Otherwise, it's probably just like about to start. Yeah.
So, just a question on that. So, would you say it's not just either one or the other, or when I say that, I mean it has physical manifestations?
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of our questions say that burnout is just a mental state. But looking at what you said, it definitely has some manifestations in our body and how we actually go about our days. And
I think it would be different from person to person. I know some people, in terms of their speech, actually one guy that I'm mentoring, it's very clear when he's tired, he talks like a baby. Hey, all right, let's fix that. So anyways, so I guess it's different from person to person. Some people I know would really not be able to wake up early. So they are able to like get up, but they always miss their alarm. So WHO would say it's something that we should look out for, but it's not really like a medical condition. It's really different from depression or other mental health challenges. But this could lead to or be an onset to a major mental health condition such as depression. So we can say that everybody would experience burnout every now and then. But needless to say, this is not healthy. Like say having those three components, would lead you to either unhealthy mindset or unhealthy mental condition, or unhealthy relationships and towards your work, unhealthy relationship towards your work, or unhealthy relationship towards your workmates. Yeah. So normally, if you have those three things, it's already like you need to address it because it's really gonna make an impact on yourself and the people around you or your organization. maybe like say having one of those three things, pwede pa. Like it's not gonna be that clearly seen, or people won't necessarily see it right away.
Having one of these three, we might not necessarily be burnt out yet in the scientific sense, in this in the definition of the word itself.
At least the technical term, because like WHO would consider it as a syndrome, so it's not really like a mental health condition. But having that kind of definition, it's kind of like, technical. So
I think we can now talk about some places or some aspects of where burnout might begin, where we see it. And I think that could give us a clear foundation, a clear picture of how we can actually tackle that, at least alleviate this in our own sense.
I think it's just important to, instead of like, okay, you're burnout, how do we deal with that? Or how to address that? I think it's still always better to look at, say, okay, how do we even
experience?
Where do we even see it budding and starting? And then what can we do about it until it becomes really like a full-blown burning out? And it's too late for us to like do something about it.
Okay, so actually we have three areas, JR, where burnout may arise or may come from. And these are maybe general areas on where we can see this burnout budding from. And the first of these three areas, or these three causes, is actually our emotions. And burnout can happen when we don't manage our difficult emotions or the pent-up feelings that we have. And this can lead to emotional exhaustion, which is both the first component of burnout that we mentioned earlier, and it's also the first indicator of students, of leaders, of individuals being burnt out.
Mind you, this is true for men and women. I think a lot of people would say like, okay, women would handle emotions differently, men would handle it differently. Of course, we have a ton of debates and different arguments about it, but needless to say, all of us are affected by emotions, and we all need to realize that. So I see you as not a very emotional guy, but you're also somehow we're all affected by that. I tend to be a little bit emotional. I get to tear up quite easily, but I would also say that there are other emotions that would trigger me burning out that I'm not quite aware until recently when I realized like, parang sheesh. I experience all of these like pent up emotions and they're actually hindering me from being productive. So emotions are not necessarily wrong, but we don't want to be stuck by that. So a lot of people would tend to brood over their emotions. There's a priest he was having a homily one time and he was saying like, pag may pinagdadaanan ka, daanan mo lang, wag mong ibahay. That means basically, you got that. But a lot of people would just like harbor and really like baby it instead of like dealing with it. I mean, there's I'd say a lot of people would probably not know how to, wouldn't know how to deal with their emotions. So, in meetings, sometimes I would tend to be very irritable and won't realize it until like, why don't I feel good about like after a heavy meeting? I'd say, sheesh, like, I know that was not a good meeting. I don't know why. I don't know how to feel about it. And sometimes like I feel guilty for feeling bad about it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, and then sometimes I just like, whatever. And then later on, it's still gonna bother me because I was not really looking at it closely. Oh, binahay. Or like I try to ignore it, but it's still there, and like hindi ko dinaanan ng maayos. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think really realizing our pent up emotions, identifying what those emotions are, is the first step to actually dealing.
Yeah, so in a podcast of Brene Brown with Emily and Amelia Nagoski, so they talk about burnout and completing the stress cycle. I'll say some more about it also, the stress cycle, later. But they're also saying that like our emotions are like a tunnel. So basically it's dark and it's murky. Sometimes you don't wanna. It's probably gonna paralyze you if you end up like being stuck in that tunnel.
Yeah.
But you have to go through it and just like walk until at the end of the tunnel there's clarity. But you just really need to go through that. So they're saying that you really have to deal with it. You can't ignore it, or you can't just like have it sit there. If you want to have some antidote to burnout, then deal with those emotions. So, but how do we do that? Stay tuned.
The second cause or area where we can see burnout budding is actually stress. And this is, I think, very not alien for all of us. I mean, we might be experiencing it, currently or before, after.
For sure.
When we're shooting this podcast. But it just goes to show, I mean, this is something that we experience on a day-to-day basis.
Yep.
And because it's something we experience on a day-to-day basis, it's actually a normal physiologic response to any perceived threat. And just like what you said, it happens in a cycle, and I actually didn't know about that until I was preparing for this podcast. So an interesting tidbit right there. You learn something every day. But just to give a brief background on this cycle, correct me if I'm wrong, JR, but it happens first when we have a perceived threat, when we feel unsafe, when we get triggered by some stressors. And then it proceeds with us doing an action or doing something to combat or to at least alleviate that feeling of being unsafe. And then it becomes completed when we escape from that threat. So we get that feeling that we're now safe, we get that feeling that we're over it, and we actually validate that feeling. Does that make sense?
Yes, so you're basically right. And we, as human beings, we just experience that one after the other. Because that's just how life is. We're always going to be threatened, like either am I going to get sick of COVID, or is my family going to be all right? Will I have food to eat? So there's always going to be threat. And a lot of those things, they're not necessarily like wrong. They're actually neutral things. Right. It just tells you that you need it. Just like emotions, they're not necessarily wrong. But it tells you something about what you need to pay attention to.
Yeah.
So same with stress. Stress is like an indication that, hey, you need to do something about your life. It's either like go and study because you're probably not gonna pass your subjects if you don't. And that's actually a good thing. It's not necessarily wrong. But there's always like, I think it's just part of life that we experience. Like if we don't do anything about a certain aspect of our life, there's something that's not gonna go right. So that's the stress cycle. So you perceive the threat or the need, you carry it, you do something about it, and then you complete it, or you escape the threat, and then you face another one, and then another one, and then another one. So
there's so many ways to experience stress. And actually, Jay, I want to share. Sometimes just looking at myself, thinking I'm not doing enough, or I'm performing less than the optimal, than optimal, and less than I'm able to or supposed to, is something that stresses me out. Or just maybe the fact that I know I'm procrastinating, just that introspect, getting to beat up myself. I would say that really causes a lot of stress as well. And this is what you said. Doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. It pushes me to do something about it.
And I think it's just natural for people to be stressed out with school if you're a student. I'll be worried if you guys are not stressed out with school. That means like you guys don't care about your studies anymore. Of course, this is like a thin line because we don't want to play down naman or like, not acknowledge that people would experience being stressed by school a lot more than the others, and it would lead them to to different conditions, right, or different mindsets, would lead them to the different dark spaces in their minds. But I think for all the students, there's a healthy dose of stress that school, and I think it's just natural, it's just normal.
Yeah, and I think most of the time, you don't actually get to manage that stress well, or at least complete the cycle. And I think that's very important.
And it leads to burnout.
Yeah.
And it leads to burnout if you're not able to really like complete the cycle. Sometimes you do something about it, but it's not really like addressing your stress. Yeah. So you're basically distracting yourself. So I'll say more about that later.
So actually here, I found this really interesting earlier while looking at the definitions for stress. So 2 different definitions. First from Hans Selye. I'm sorry if I got that pronunciation wrong. So he's actually a pretty well-regarded fellow in psychology and medicine. Defines stress as the non-specific response of the body to any demand for change. And it just goes to show. I mean, in contrast to this, rather, in physics, according to Boston University, they measure stress as a measure of what the material feels or what the object feels from externally applied forces. And I just found that analogy pretty interesting to what you said earlier, that it comes from outside forces. It's a neutral thing. It's our response or our desire for change.
Yeah, for example, like in the engineering, the stress test is really like put stressor on it to see how much it can handle. That's also basically the same for life. But of course, we can't do that. Like, okay, let's put some more stress on this person experimentally. We don't want to do that, but the concept could really be the same. Good on you. Way to go researching things.
The tables have turned. But anyways, enough about stress. We might get a bit too stressed.
I do my research too.
Just kidding. Yeah. We have one more cause, one more area where burnout may come from. And this is another pretty interesting one. It's called wearing out. Might be some confusion regarding to that principle, that area. But it's closely related to the phenomenon or what we think of as rest. And sometimes our exhaustion, sometimes burning out can get chronic when we don't rest enough. Or when we don't feel that we're resting well or we're resting efficiently, effectively. And the common misconception to this, I myself, I'm a victim of this misconception. We oftenly think of rest as the opposite of work. So we either rest or we're working. So it's only one or the other, 2 mutually exclusive things.
For example, someone I know would play Valorant after exams, and they would feel so guilty about it sometimes because like, oh, I can't afford to actually like do this because there's still a ton of work to do. But I would tell them like, but if that will actually make you a lot more effective studying, then let it be. But if it's not helpful, then why are you doing it? So something like that. Or some people naman, for example, me, I would end up like instead of sleeping, like I'll listen to podcasts or I'll scroll social media. And then I realized I thought I'm resting, but like, sheesh, I have not rested. And I'm not really able to recuperate or recover from being tired. Needless to say, I think the very obvious thing here is it's important for us to recognize that we're human beings. We're not robots. So we wear out. and it's normal to get tired and to be spent. And it's not necessarily wrong. But failing to recognize that would really make a big difference as to whether we're gonna get burnt out or not. So if you're always thinking like you always need to be in A shape, and it's like a no to rest, you probably need to reconsider that, because it's perfectly natural to get tired and wear out.
Yeah. I want to build on that point that you said. It's perfectly fine for us to be human in our own regard, because I don't think we give enough credit to ourselves for both the work we're doing, and second, to how much rest we deserve as well.
Correct.
And I can relate to that because it happens a lot to me. And just taking a short break in those moments where I want to take a short break after work or a quick nap, just want to sleep, get my siesta. But all I can think about when I'm in that zone already, when I'm lying down, about to close my eyes, just pops out in my mind right away all the things that I have to do. And there's guilt there, as like what you said. I relate to that. There's anxiety, and when you think of those things that you just have to do, I end up cutting my time for rest short and just go back to work. And this doesn't just happen in the middle of the day, but also for my regular sleeping patterns. It affects my sleep.
For sure.
You're about to sleep. You want to get that 8 hours of rest, and all you can do is
I envy you. You get 8 hours.
I didn't say that, but I said I wanted to. But I end up getting fixated on I want to get 8 hours of rest. I want to get 8 hours of rest. But in that sense, I'm unconsciously still thinking about my work, because that's why I want to get my 8 hours of rest, and not because I want to rest. I get what I'm saying. And what ends up, that 8 hours, worst case scenario, it gets halved. It gets slashed by 3/4.
Inability to rest, like wearing out and prolonging the effect of that, and not being able to handle it well, could really be connected so much with like emotions and stress.
Yeah.
So it's not as if like people don't recognize now, I'm tired. Most likely they're not able to recognize that because they're stressed out and someone's like stressing them and therefore pressuring them not to rest. Or there's just a lot of pent-up emotions that they couldn't really they couldn't afford to take the rest that they need. So they're always connected. But not really being able to do that would actually also reveal or like inability to rest and to recognize that you're wearing out. Sometimes clouds also your ability to see your priorities and say like, why am I even like spending so much time and energy for this thing, for my org, it's important, but like, hey, that's not my whole life. Even work, like me, I have to always remind myself like work is not my only life. And I have to take rests also for the people I care about and the other things that I would want to, be my priority. But if you don't have that, you won't be able to really know your priorities well, or at least you'll forget it. So
I think that's really important. First, recognizing you're human. Second, really finding what rest works best for you. So to recap, 3 areas where we experience or where burnout begins. We have emotions, our emotions, emotional exhaustion. We have stress, which I've learned happens in a cycle. And finally, we have wearing out or the chronic exhaustion we experience when we don't rest.
Okay, so how do you deal with these sources or causes of burnout? So some of these things, when you're already experiencing it, I guess for your recovery, you can apply all these things. But I'd say we're mainly tackling on before it even starts or when it's starting, how do we deal with that? So it's good for us to like recognize right away, like, okay, my emotions now again. Because for example, for sure, you've experienced burnout, so you kind of know the pattern already of how you experience these things.
Yeah.
So right, okay. So how do we deal with emotions? One tip lang is for us to label them. So it really makes a big difference. So Susan David, she wrote Emotional Agility. It's a book, but Harvard Business Review would also use this. She's a faculty also of Harvard Medical School. She really said that it's important for us to label our emotions, but the problem is it's actually harder than you think. So
For sure.
earlier you said that, okay, I feel anxious, but a lot of times even the word anxious doesn't really like quite
encapsulate what you're feeling.
Yeah, exactly. Like hit where it's, hurting. So she's saying that it would probably be good for us to have either one, increase your vocabulary of emotions.
Wow.
So for example, you're angry, but you're not necessarily just angry. So you're probably what? Defensive, annoyed, frustrated, offended, disgusted, So those are different things, subtle differences, but I think it makes a big difference. So another example, you're hurt. You're hurt, why? You're probably jealous or isolated, neglected, aggrieved, abandoned, so something like that. So increasing your vocab makes a big difference in naming that and somehow beginning to understand. So my man, Craig Groeschel, he's also a leadership podcaster. He would always say, what you can't define, you can't defeat. So it's basically the same thing, Another thing, on the other hand, sometimes if you can't name it, or even if you can name it, you don't know the intensity. So you probably need to gauge how much, like if you're angry, how angry are you? If you're sad, how sad are you? So some people, I'm not a fan of this, but I think it helps other people, is to like have a scale. Like from 1 to 10, 10 is the highest, 1 is the lowest. How angry are you? So some people might find that very useful just to gauge, okay, this is much. And then they are able to handle that. So label your emotions. I'm overhearing, it's a funny story. I'm overhearing my brother, he's a psychiatrist, and he's talking to his son, who's like a toddler, a 4-year-old kid. And then, of course, my nephew, he's crying, and my brother started just like, okay, tell me what you feel. It's like,
on a toddler.
Exactly. And I was like, are you serious? And then my nephew began to like really locate the words and express how he feels. And then later on, they're actually already talking about it, and that's good for my nephew. And I realized like, yeah, that sounds weird, but had I known that before, that could also save a lot of like, my childhood angst. No, I had a happy childhood, but that was actually very helpful. But
right. Yeah, and it's something that we don't do I think I don't personally do as often as I should. Just getting some time. Hey, before I make any decisions, before I make any choices, hey, what do I feel? Am I feeling? You said a lot of words, a lot of synonyms. Maybe just understanding those for my own will allow me to get to know myself a bit more. Maybe handle this a bit better.
Yeah.
So
Second one is completing the stress cycle. So we said something about that earlier, but I just like to note that, of course, stress, how we handle stress would have 2 ways. One is either you remove the stressor so that you can handle it, or you make yourself stronger so that you can handle the stress better. So basically, that's like what you do about it, because like you feel the threat, and then you do something about it, and then you escape it. So sometimes you do something about it, but it's not really making you escape the threat. Oh, it's not really effective. So it's either you're distracting or you're not necessarily finding a way how to deal with it, because they don't know the reality of stress. So physics or engineering would tell us like There you go. There's a lot of stressor in my neighborhood. But so yeah, basically, what you can do about it is identify what's stressing me out. Can I remove some of these stressors? For example, like have an account and pin down. So for example, school is stressing me out. Okay, what's stressing me out about school? Can I remove some of my subjects? For sure not. So that's not an option. That's not an option. It's like, okay, remove my requirements, remove my exactly. I'll remove my accounting exam. Like you can't do that. So maybe what you can do is like, okay, how can I arm myself and strengthen myself so that I could be ready and I could be more fit to carry that load. So maybe you should have studying ahead of time, like in a semester instead of cramming things. So one way to beef yourself up is to actually have a tutor or whatever.
Study
to
with
strengthen yourself.
Yeah.
Exactly. But in terms of relationally, in terms of relationship, which is a very big source of stress. So it's either like group mates. You have a group work, and I don't know if you're stressed out because you're being pressured by your group, and say like, okay, how can I remove some of these pressure and stress? One way to deal with it externally is talk to your friends or talk to your group mates and say like, hey, I feel this way. Can we level expectations? How are we relating to one another? That will really make a significant impact on the load you're carrying. Or like say, why am I so insecure? Like, why do I even like keep on comparing, or why am I so fearful of what people think about me? Is there a way for me to strengthen that so that I can handle the pressure of my peers or my group mates? So that's how you try to do something about that portion of your stress, and then see what if it works. So escape the threat. So that's how you complete the stress cycle.
So it's either just one, seeing what you can remove, if any, of those stressors that you're not necessarily supposed to be stressed out with. And second, just going through it, battling in the trenches, seeing where you
yourself,
can strengthen. Strengthening yourself.
Or it could be both. So see if you can actually remove some of that. For example, like you're doing a lot. Like what? You have 8 orgs. And you're stressed out. No, I mean like hypothetical. Theoretically, like you have 8 orgs and say like you're stressed out. So maybe like remove one. Maybe it would be a big difference already. I don't know. So remove one. And that's basically removing the load of stress. And then how do you actually, and then like say having a lot of org works. So maybe like learn how to organize yourself, do some like personal order exercises, how to do time management better. So, but the two principle or the two areas of like, okay, lessen the load or strengthen the capacity would already be a big thing for many people. And then let's move to the last one. So wearing out, basically taking strategic rests. So when you're tired, it's a rest. But of course, as we said kanina, it's not necessarily the case that you're able to rest just because you're not doing anything.
For sure.
So, but being able to rest would help you actually, all these memories and all these thoughts. So sometimes it will not sometimes, it will actually make you very, very productive. So University of Southern California in the neuroscience department, so they made a study and they call something like a default mode network. So basically this is the definition. I'll just read it. A mind at rest is anything but vacant. Rather than overall decrease in activity, the activity just shifts to different parts of the brain. These parts that activate during rest eventually became collectively known as the default mode network. What that is. So basically it's saying like, when you're resting, it's not as if you're not doing anything. It just shifts in the different parts of your brain. And then it activates different areas of your brain that helps you either like induce memories that would help you. I never thought that I was able to do that before. Right? I was able to do that pala. Or have those creative juices come out because you're employing different parts of your mind or your brain activity.
I just want to share something about that real quick. Just real quick. When you said that, I always find myself when I have a problem, it usually just comes out. The solution to it comes in the weirdest times when I'm washing dishes or fixing my bed. Hey, here's the solution. So sometimes I just tell myself, well, okay, I have a problem. Why don't I just wash the dishes? So I can find
even if there's
solution.
nothing to wash.
Yeah, right. But, yeah, that's just a funny story. But anyways,
yeah, good.
You were saying
that's also true for me. Like especially when I do my plants. So when I do gardening, it's really like I'm not thinking about anything. But after that, I feel so refreshed and able to like okay, there's some inspiration about like a talk that I need to give or whatnot.
right.
Stephen Covey, in his 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, would cite a very important principle, this habit. It's called sharpening your saw. So basically, taking a strategic rest enable you to have some time to develop yourself and sharpen. That might actually help your work, but also your overall well-being in general. That wherever you are, you're in a better shape.
Right.
So there are 4 things that you need to pay attention to in terms of taking strategic rest would be heart, mind, body, and soul. So of course, a lot of people would have different beliefs about this, but basically like body, take some rest, sleep, work out, eat healthy, pay attention to that. Heart would be like relationships, how you're dealing with like loved ones, how are you experiencing like affirmation, quality time, basically that. And then mind would be, are you studying? Are you engaging your mind in different things other than work? Are you learning something new? And I think that makes a big difference also. And then the soul one would be like, of course, different people have different beliefs, but the whole idea of like paying attention to your inner self.
Yeah.
And your longings, desires, it would be good for you to also like pay attention to that. Yeah. So some people would pray or meditate, or just have like, those like silence moments that just like hear themselves or like their inner self. So basically, that's it. So taking a strategic rest would help you realize that I'm wearing out, but I don't need to wait until like I'm totally spent before I could actually rest. Like so that's why it's strategic. Like before you even experience like totally zero energy, rest ka na, because that will even make you a lot better. Even if you're 50% spent, go take a rest and then do something about it.
I just realized it. You have to make it deliberate. No? Being strategic about it means you have to make a decision. Hey, I'm gonna rest before I even encounter this. Hey, I'm gonna be deliberate about this. I guess that mindset is really helpful, like for myself.
Winston Churchill, and the other actually like very good leaders, but he is actually quite known for taking naps.
Right.
So I think he's my idol. I take naps also, but that's just like he really decides like at this time I'm gonna take a nap, and then I'm gonna sleep this much. So I guess you can actually decide on doing those things. Some people might say like, oh, I am not yet like tired, or I'm not yet sleepy, so it's not yet time. But you can actually decide to do that and then sleep when you want to and when you need to, and then wake up when you need to. We're not enslaved by all these like feelings, emotions of like, I was still sleepy. But anyways.
Yeah. I mean, for sure. And going back to your question, how I rest usually. 2 things actually. I either get some sleep. I really pride myself in getting sleep. Actually, come to think of it, there are 3 things. First is sleep. Second is being active physically, working out or walking, taking a walk, like I mentioned earlier. And the third is spending time with my friends or with other people. Maybe just just the mere conversing outside of work, outside of academics. Is rest, I think, for me already.
Yep, for me would be definitely sleep. And then I take some quiet time, pray, and
in the
then workout. Yeah, sports.
Yeah.
So, and plants. So I guess that's more than 3. But anyways. All right, so there you go. Labeling your emotions, completing the stress cycle, and then taking strategic rests. I think those 3 would help you and many stressed out students out there. So to avoid,
including myself. Yes.
There are many ways to deal with burnout. But as we recognize that the possible sources of burnout would be emotion, stress, and wearing out, it would be good for us to label our emotions, to complete the stress cycle, and to take strategic rests. We hope that those could really help you.
Personally, there's so much tidbits and useful things that I've learned from this podcast. But the good news, the better news, is that we'll be back with more relevant topics for all of you, our viewers. So if you do want to check those out, make sure to follow us on Facebook, on Spotify, or wherever you may get your podcast. Once again, we are Aaron and JR, and this has been Ain't a Boss, the only leadership podcast for highly stressed out students. Peace out.
Yes. Burnout.